The culling. The Galactic Empire did not negotiate. It did not reason. It simply took what it wanted and erased what it did not need. The children of New Volgograd never stood a chance. The attack came at dawn. Imperial dropships roared through the sky, dark shapes blotting out the rising sun. When they landed, the ground trembled. Towering war machines deployed, their cannons humming with barely contained energy. Elite shock troopers, clad in gleaming black armor, spread through the colony like a plague. The orders were simple: cleanse the settlement, leave no survivors. They started with the men, fathers and brothers, farmers and engineers, all dragged from their homes and executed in the streets. Their bodies were left where they fell, lifeless eyes staring at the burning sky. Then they turned to the women. Some fought, others pleaded. It made no difference. The Empire did not care for words. The last to die were the children. A boy, 6 years old, clutched his sister's hand as the soldiers surrounded them. His name was Ivan, and he did not understand why the metal men pointed their guns at him. His sister, Anya, 10 years old and old enough to know the truth, tried to shield him. She screamed. A single shot silenced her. Ivan fell next, his tiny body crumpling beside hers, his small fingers still wrapped around her lifeless hand. Lord Zelvok stood over the bodies, his violet eyes cold, his expression unreadable. To him, this was just another task. Humans were pests, and like any infestation, they had to be eradicated before they spread. By midday, New Volgograd was nothing but ashes. And somewhere, beyond the ruins, beyond the smoke and death, a mother was coming home. Yelena Petrovna had spent the morning hunting in the forest. She moved through the underbrush like a shadow, her old instincts never dulling. The rifle in her hands was crude compared to the weapons she once wielded, but it was enough to feed her family. She smiled at the thought. Her children would love the fresh meat. Then she smelled the smoke. By the time she reached the outskirts of New Volgograd, the fires were still burning. Her breath caught in her throat. No! She ran, past the charred bodies, past the crumbling homes, past the execution lines, where bodies lay stacked in silent testimony to the massacre. She did not stop until she found them. Ivan, Anya, her babies. They lay together in the dirt, small and fragile, their blood pooling in the dust. Ivan's tiny fingers still clung to his sister's hand. Yelena fell to her knees. A sound tore from her throat. Not a scream, not a cry, but something ancient, something primal. Something that had not been heard in years. The Baba Yaga had been sleeping. Now she was awake, and the galaxy would burn for what it had done. The hunt begins. The mother was dead. Yelena Petrovna had buried her children beneath the twisted ruins of New Volgograd, marking their graves with stones from the home they once shared. She had whispered their names, pressing her lips against the dirt where they rested. Then she stood, leaving the woman she had once been behind. The Baba Yaga walked again. The Empire thought it had broken humanity. They did not know what lurked in the dark corners of human history. They had never heard of the Night Witches, soldiers trained in the forgotten wars of Earth, shaped into ghosts and executioners. Yelena had once been their finest. Enhanced beyond natural limits, she could move without sound, kill without hesitation, and vanish without a trace. She had been a shadow, slipping through battlefields where entire units disappeared in the night. She had left that life behind for her children. Now, she had nothing left to lose. She needed weapons. She needed information. And she knew exactly where to get them. The black market station of Karaktul was a rotting carcass of metal and crime, orbiting a dead moon. Pirates, smugglers, and mercenaries called it home, selling stolen tech and illicit goods to the highest bidder. Yelena stepped off the transport, dressed in a tattered cloak, her face hidden beneath a hood. She moved through the crowded bazaar like a predator, listening, waiting. Her target was easy to find. A bloated alien arms dealer sat in a reinforced booth, flanked by cybernetic guards. Tovar Resk, an old acquaintance. He recognized her just before she put a knife to his throat. "I need weapons." Her voice was quiet, cold. Resk swallowed hard. "Baba Yaga," he whispered, voice trembling. I thought you were dead. She pressed the blade tighter. You thought wrong. Minutes later, she walked out armed to the teeth. A railgun sniper rifle, EMP grenades, a plasma blade, and enough explosives to level a starship. Her next target was information. The Imperial network was vast, but it had weak links. A corrupt navigation officer in a cantina, drunk and careless, was all she needed. One broken arm and 2 shattered ribs later, she had her answer. Lord Zelvok's fleet was moving to another colony. Another slaughter. She would get there first. The stolen Imperial supply ship drifted toward its target, Zelvok's flagship, the Blood Oath. Inside, Yelena sat in the shadows, silent, patient. She had killed the original crew hours ago, their bodies dumped into the void. The ship's transponder still broadcasted an all-clear signal. She watched the looming warship grow larger in the viewport, its docking bay opening. She whispered a promise to her children. They would not rest until she had drowned the Empire in blood. The ship crossed the threshold into the enemy's stronghold. The hunt had begun. Terror in the dark. The Blood Oath welcomed its doom without hesitation. The stolen supply ship drifted into the Imperial flagship's hangar, its automated docking sequence running as expected. No alarms blared. No suspicions were raised. Inside the cavernous bay, engineers and security officers moved in routine patterns, oblivious to the monster hiding among them. They didn't notice the airlock seal with a hiss. They didn't notice the darkness shift. And by the time they realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The first body fell with no sound. A technician, his throat neatly slit, slumped against the supply crate. His partner turned, only to feel a blade slide beneath his chin, cutting off both his scream and his life. The lights flickered. A security officer, watching from a console, frowned. Power fluctuations? That shouldn't happen on a flagship. He reached for his communicator. A hand clamped over his mouth. A knife found his heart. The lights went out. The ship's AI automatically triggered red emergency lighting, bathing the hangar in an eerie glow. The surviving crew looked around, weapons drawn. Nothing moved. Then, one by one, they started disappearing. A soldier on patrol turned a corner and was suddenly gone, his rifle clattering to the floor a second later. 2 engineers backed toward the safety of a transport shuttle. A figure rose from the shadows behind them. The blade was quick. Their deaths were silent. Panic spread like a virus. The hangar descended into chaos. The Baba Yaga was inside. Bridge of the Blood Oath. Lord Zelvok scowled at the reports flooding his console. Missing personnel. Weapons fire in the hangar. No clear enemy detected. His Praetorian Guard, the finest warriors in the Empire, stood at attention, waiting for orders. They had faced rebels, warlords, and entire planetary uprisings. But something about this was different. Zelvok turned to his intelligence officer. How many intruders? The officer's skin was pale. His mandibles twitched. We think it's just one, my lord. Zelvok's patience snapped. One? One what? The answer came not from his officer, but from the ship's intercom. A voice, cold as death, whispered through the speakers. You kill my children. The lights shut off completely. The emergency klaxons wailed, their shrieks swallowed by the sudden, deafening silence of the ship. Zelvok's blood ran cold. This wasn't a soldier. This wasn't a human resistance fighter. This was something else. Something unstoppable. Something the Empire should never have awakened. And now it was hunting them. Wrath of Baba Yaga. The Blood Oath was dying. Its crew didn't know it yet. The emergency sirens howled, their cries swallowed by the ship's vast metal corridors. Security teams moved in tight formations, scanning every shadow, every flickering light. They would not see her coming. They never did. Zelvok stood in the bridge, sweat slicking his skin. He was no coward. He had led purges on a dozen worlds, crushed planetary rebellions, wiped out entire species that dared resist imperial rule. But this was different. The reports made no sense. Dozens of men dead. No enemy detected. No alarms triggered. And then there was the voice. The human voice, whispering over the intercom, slipping into his ears like the cold touch of death itself. Zelvok gritted his teeth. No, he was an imperial lord, not some frightened animal. He turned to his Praetorian guard. Seal the bridge. Double security. I want this ship purged of whatever. The lights went out. A single gunshot rang out. One of his guards crumpled. A hole between his eyes. The others whirled, weapons raised, but she was already among them. A plasma blade ignited, humming like a serpent's hiss. A guard staggered back, clutching at the burning stump where his arm had been. A railgun fired. Another head snapped back, body collapsing like a puppet with its strings cut. She moved like a wraith, too fast, too silent. A guard swung his rifle. She ducked, spun, severed his tendons with a precise slice of her blade. He screamed, falling to his knees, only for her boot to crash down on his skull, silencing him forever. The last of them fired wildly, fear overriding training. His plasma rounds hit nothing but air. A whisper brushed his ear. Boo! The knife slid across his throat. The bridge fell silent. Zelvok was alone. He backed toward the command throne, his claws shaking as he reached for his weapon. What are you? His voice was barely a whisper. The shadows shifted. A figure stepped forward, cloaked in blood and darkness. A human woman, but not human at all. Her eyes burned with rage beyond reason, beyond sanity. I'm a mother. Zelvok raised his weapon. Too slow. The Baba Yaga struck. His own blade was torn from his grasp. A vice-like grip seized his throat, slamming him against the bulkhead. He gasped, clawing at her iron grip. His vision blurred, black creeping in at the edges. You kill my children, she whispered, and then she ripped out his throat. The next morning, the blood oath drifted in space, silent and empty. The Empire found Zelvok's severed head impaled on the Emperor's throne. A warning, a promise. The Baba Yaga had returned, and she was just getting started.